That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Benediction, a biopic about Siegfried Sassoon, the World War I poet. It's directed by Terence Davies, his 9th film that premiered at the 2021 Toronto International Film Festival and is being released June 3rd, 2022, courtesy of Roadside Attractions.
The director?
Terence Davies.
What do I know him from?
I don't know that you've seen anything of Terence Davies, but a very notable queer film director. Started out with some semi-autobiographical films that are kind of quite harrowing about his childhood. The Long Day Closes, for instance. He's done a really good House of Mirth adaptation starring Gillian Anderson and Eric Stoltz from 1999. The Deep Blue Sea starring Rachel Weisz from 2011. Sunset Song. His last film previous to this is a biopic of sorts of Emily Dickinson starring Cynthia Nixon called A Quiet Passion, which I highly, highly recommend. I love that film.
Well, this film, I didn't know who Siegfried Sassoon was. And after watching the film, I feel like I don't really understand this person at all, except that he did serve in the military for a time. He was a poet.
He was a conscientious objector.
We get no concept of like his level of success as a writer. Or the public's opinion of him. We don't see him really go through any hardships. We see him get shot. We don't even see it. We just hear it, and then we see him in the hospital bed. And that's handled like, oh, girl, you just got shot. It just feels like a very bland story about a mildly bitchy man, gay man. And then it doesn't, like, it's not a sweeping biopic, but then it does take a kind of a big portion of his life. But no particular moment, just sort of like, when he was like in his 20s in the military and then leaving after he gets shot. And then he has a couple of romances that are just like very basic. Like clearly these are not going to work out, but not particularly abusive or ruinous. They're just like, you know, not great relationships. Then we see him marry a woman. Mm-hmm. We don't see it. He just meets this lady who he had met previously, and basically like a lot of gay men in the 1940s, you know, marrying women to try to have a normal life. He does that, and then he has a son. Mm-hmm. We don't see any of it. We don't see the marriage, the relationship, the rearing of the child.
You see snippets of it. You do.
I mean, all we get is 40 years later. Now the son is a grown-ass man, and he has convinced his father to come stay with him for a time because his dad, the poet, Sassoon, is kind of like depressed, but it's very generic. He's just like sitting in a dark room.
Well, he's going through like a crisis of faith because at the beginning he's converting to Catholicism.
It all feels very lukewarm to me. And then the film just ends. Like they go see a play or musical, whatever, and they leave the theater. And Siegfried tells his son, like, I'd rather walk home. You take the cab. That's it. We don't know about his death. We don't... I'm just kind of shocked that, like, once again, I'm watching sort of like a film about a historical figure who's made to seem not that interesting without any big, like, things that really pop out as to why this person, why tell this story.
I think you're going in really hard on a film that I think is meant to be more of an impression of this person and of a period. And in that regard, I think as a recuperation of how people's lives were, especially for gay men, is important and notable. And I do think the screenplay is well written in a sense that it captures this period more than perhaps Siegfried Sassoon.
But, okay, but then even like, so gay men during that period, like the film doesn't show any hardships. Well, they're just very free. They seem very privileged. Again, we don't get any idea of anyone's financial situation.
Again, so I think that he's probably also, it would help to know a little bit about this period going into the film because Terence Davies isn't really orienting us at all, of course. But yes, these were a very privileged elitist group of people. They actually were called, they had a term for these people. They were called the Bright Young Things. 1920s London.
They're just fancy
young gentlemen,
yeah.
Artists, musicians, etc. Evelyn Waugh wrote a book about them called Vile Bodies that's very notable, that was turned into a film at some point, and that's what the universe he was navigating, and that's, I think, the largest chunk of this film, because his other the lovers that he has are all part of that, like Ivor Novello and Stephen Tennant, who he kind of falls very hard for. Well, he falls hard for both of them, but Tennant they show coming back as an adult, trying to reconnect with him.
You know, when you read or watch stories like movies, or even that play we saw, like Sky in the Alabama
Blues for an Alabama Sky.
Seeing queer black people during the Harlem Renaissance and then them living in this sort of fantasy land, but then it's always very clear that in the background there's a lot of hostility. This film, it opens in London, 1914. Mm-hmm. We see Siegfried go to his like commanding officers and basically say like, I don't agree with the war, and he's just talking to them like, yeah, I don't agree, and they're like, it just plays so oddly, there's no recourse for him behaving this way or him admitting that he's homosexual. I mean, we just reviewed like 3 movies about gay men in the military and all the repercussions there would have been, and then he's just like, no girl, I don't want to fight, and they're like, well, we're gonna discharge you to like a psychiatric facility
in Scotland.
So then a portion of the film is him there, and that's where he meets his first little boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And then that boyfriend gets discharged from the psychiatric facility because he's fit to be a soldier now, and he gets killed in battle. So then, of course, Siegfried's a little sad. Then a gunshot happens, but that's handled like, oh, no big deal. And then the biggest portion of the film is him sort of in these 2 other romances with...
Well, kind of 3, actually, because he does connect with... And there are more that Davies isn't covering, but he connects with Glenn, who was Ivor Novello's previous partner that left him for Sassoon. There are entanglements there. But he's part of a set of society where there's a discretion allowed them, such as his mother, played by Geraldine James. Like, she's aware that her son is gay. There is some privilege there, of course.
It's well done and well acted. I think the dialogue, I mean, it just feels very like...
Oh, there's a large portion of it where it is just these kind of rigid, pretentious men just being bitchy to one another.
But you're saying it like it's fun. It's not fun. It's very mild bitchiness.
I agree.
This is no Oscar Wilde shit. This is no Golden Girl shit.
No, but Oscar Wilde's interesting because you have Simon Russell Beale playing Robbie Ross, who was a journalist that was never in the closet, which kind of hurt this person. Right. But he was a mentor for Sassoon. But they do have a brief mention about how this person stuck by Oscar Wilde during his trial. And, Tennyson, Lord Alfred Douglas's... The Love That Dare Not Speak Its Name. Like that is all very much of the recent past, and where homosexuality wasn't even a term until very recently, before all of this is taking place.
I did like the opening, like the first 15 minutes, because we get a lot of like archival footage of wartime, and then we're hearing throughout the film. I think this is going to slightly affect the use of Sassoon's poetry throughout the film. Is a nice compliment, mm-hmm. Although I feel like the placement of it is sort of like, we're gonna plot this poem here and have a scene sort of explaining it. But I did like the beginning. When Siegfried goes to the psychiatric facility, his psychiatrist turns out to be gay.
Dr. Rivers, played by Ben Daniels.
And again, just like this person seemed to have a very charmed life. Like, you just mouth off to your commanding officers, they send you to this place thinking it's punishment, and then your doctor ends up being gay. And there seems to be a little sort of like attention or attraction, but it's very mild, nothing comes of it. And then he has a sweet little time there.
And then he's even kind of shares barbs with the chief medical officer, played by Julian Sands.
And he's kind of being like openly affectionate with his little boyfriend. And then there's a scene where like an officer...
That's Julian
Sands. Oh yeah,
like
kind of confronts him, but then says like, whatever.
You didn't recognize him?
No.
From Boxing Helena?
Oh, that's the guy who cuts off
Sherilyn Fenn's limbs, yeah.
So when Siegfried leaves the military, he is off with his little... The older gentleman who's always by his side, Robbie
Ross. Mm-hmm.
And they go to some old lady's house, like some rich, fabulous woman's house. Mm-hmm. And she like every handsome young man who goes to her house tries to seduce him. And Robbie tells him, like, just so you know, you need to lock your door because she's going to try to come in.
He says,
there.
lock your door or wear something really off-putting.
But of course he doesn't, and she strolls in there and she's like, I was going to offer you hot cocoa, but I figured you'd prefer me. And then he says, I'm afraid I prefer cocoa, like telling her like I'm gay girl. Mm-hmm. And then she understands, and then they have like, I mean, they're still friendly. It's just so weird because the tone of the film is like, okay, scenes like that with like a fabulous woman who's like, you know, has all these gay acquaintances. It's like, okay, that would be so fabulous, right? Like that'd be a great story to tell. But it's very lukewarm. His trials and tribulations being gay during this era don't like, I mean, there are none. And then his romances are very like basic. Like you could tell these stories in 2022 gay culture and it would feel very, similar. Like, I mean,
there are similarities, yes.
Like, oh, you're just dating people because you find them attractive, but they're really not that into you, and they're talking to other people. It's not like,
well,
like there's no sense of danger in anything that's
no,
happening.
but there's this inability to have any stability with homosexual relationships up until, you know, it was legal. So that explains a lot of kind of this frivolousness.
But then, is this like a love story? Is it about like?
But I think he was in love with a couple of them.
I guess I'm just confused. Like, what's the purpose of this story?
Recuperation is what this says, because
could you define that? What does that mean to you?
He's recuperating an erased history.
Whose?
Siegfried Sassoon, and you know.
But I don't know. But I didn't know anything about him before I watched this movie, and ending it, like I still feel like I don't know this person. So I don't understand what the purpose was. Because if it's trying to tell like life for gay men in that era, I feel like it makes it seem like it was kind of nice.
Again, I think also knowing Davies' previous work, I think this is meant to be more of an impression than a completist biopic.
Okay.
So you know, as in you clearly didn't like it, so will not, you know, want to learn more, or somebody might watch this and want to know more.
I would recommend reading the Wikipedia entry about Siegfried Sassoon.
Okay.
I mean that because that's what I did, and it was more interesting, especially the thing. Read about the person who shot him, the friendly fire. That's very interesting. But like, oh my God, the man who played his boyfriend, the not nice one,
Ivor, Jeremy Irvine, who you know from, was in War Horse, Spielberg's film, and was the white focus in Stonewall.
God, I hated that character.
Yeah,
I hated that character.
It doesn't help that I don't think that is he's not a very good actor.
And even Siegfried's mom, when she meets him, she tells Siegfried like, he's amusing but unpleasant. Like she doesn't like him either.
She said he has cruel eyes.
But he's not like vile. It's just like, oh God, like why are you into him?
He's a self-consumed narcissist.
Sure, but
like
again, it didn't feel like, oh, this is going to be like he's losing the love of a lifetime and he's going to be devastated. It's just like, this guy's a jerk. Well, you met him because he cheated on his ex to get with you.
The red flags are there from go, so yes.
I also felt like that character's Ivor. Mm-hmm. I just felt like their affair is just like pointless and boring. It just like, I mean, because it's so obvious that like this is not going to work out. And even Ivor's telling him straight away, like.
But you have to remember, this is a time when access to people was a lot different. And so like that and propinquity, you clung on to one another.
Yes, that's true. But I'm saying that the story doesn't really give the audience that sense. Like if you didn't know anything about anything, you'd be like, oh, so he's just kind of like dumb. He's just like your dumb friend who dates guys who are not good for them, but they don't realize it till it's too late.
Well, that's part of it too, yeah.
I think what I'm most disappointed about is I didn't understand what inspired this poet, except that we hear poetry about like anti-war stuff.
Most of his poetry is anti-war, and that's what motivated him. Like his more famous poems, like The Dugout, those are, you know, all inspired by that. And he's played later on in the film by Peter Capaldi, who you know from The Suicide Squad, and who's also Doctor Who for many years, among many other films, has some line to his son about how he wished he'd gotten the recognition he deserved, so to say, because he was
Which is ironic, because why didn't this filmmaker give him the recognition he deserved? Like, the filmmaker's not giving him recognition either.
Well, I disagree with that. He is, by making a film about him, but
like, we don't learn anything about his success.
This person compared to somebody like T.S. Eliot, who was a contemporary, who everybody knows, for instance.
Yeah, I was very confused by the ending because we flash forward the 40 years to see Sassoon as an older gentleman with his adult son and like very generically depressed. Then we flash back to him being younger and he's sitting on a park bench and he sees a man in a wheelchair who's like a double amputee. And then we're hearing one of his poems recited about this man who will never be able to touch a woman because of his condition. And then we see Sassoon crying. And
And there's kind of a sweeping score. But
yeah, and I guess the moment was lost on me because I just didn't feel anything for this person. Like, I didn't understand him at all. We don't get anything about his childhood. We get the sense that maybe he came from, like, you know, means because his mom seems like she has money. But we don't understand anything about him. So then in the end, like, we don't get anything. And then the final shot is not of him as an old man. It's him as a young man crying at this thing. So I just was so confused. Like, what is the point? What inspired him? What was he trying to achieve? What did he achieve? Like, what, like, was he very known during his time?
Yes.
But the film doesn't tell us that.
But it does, because he's asked to recite his poetry.
You
there.
recited a poem at a friend's wedding.
He's asked to.
I'm not trying to be difficult.
But you are. So they do. There are hints at those things. Those details are there. It's just that's not pulling focus.
Okay.
I think I think if you're going to see a film about Siegfried Sassoon, you know, chances are the attraction might be that you already might know who that is. But if you don't, then this isn't the starting point per se.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I do really like how it looks. It was shot by Nicola Daly, was the director of photography. I do think it looks quite well.
I think it's a well-made film, and the acting's fine. And
It's not my favorite Terence Davies film, and I think if you've never seen a Davies film before, like, check out his trio of short films that were released as Distant Voices, Still Lives. He did an adaptation of The Neon Bible. House of Mirth, as I said, is really good. The Deep Blue Sea. My favorite film is A Quiet Passion. I do like this better than Sunset Song. That was probably my least favorite of his, but I think it is worth checking out if you like that period, if you like certain, references to notable historical figures, at least. T.E. Lawrence, I think, shows up at the wedding. There are things of interest if you already kind of have them in mind.
Do you have anything else?
No.
What would you give it?
3.
3? I would give it 2.5 out of 5 because I'm in the middle. Like, I think it's a well done film. It didn't give me anything.
It does feel long. I've seen it twice now.
Yeah, it's over 2 hours.
It's 2 hours and 17 minutes. It's too bad that you probably won't be interested in seeing other Davies films, but if you do, A Quiet Passion.
Don't forget about our thanks button and listen to our podcast. Bye.
Bye.